So I want to just extend a warm welcome to you, whatever time zone you may be dialing in from, and to say welcome to the University of Pennsylvania's information session about the Master of Applied Positive Psychology. My name is Leona Brandwene. I serve as the Associate Director of Education at the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm delighted to be with you today. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Laura Taylor. Laura, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello. It's lovely to connect with all of you today. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Laura Taylor. I'm the Managing Coordinator of Education at the Positive Psychology Center, and I'm also a graduate of the MAPP program. Um, I'm here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, quite near the university, and I'm really curious to know where you are from. So I would love to invite you to put your current location in the chat for us so we can get a sense from all those time zones and locations that you may be dialing in. Leona?
Wonderful. So let's just take a look at that. So as those spill in, oh my goodness, from all over, I see North America, I see the Philippines. Oh my goodness, this is wonderful. Hong Kong, San Francisco, Brooklyn, London. Oh, this is lovely. So I'd encourage you all to just take a look at that chat so that you can get a sense of the others who are sharing the space with us. As we do that, I'd also like to introduce some of our other teammates who are with us. We have with us, and I just ask each of you to perhaps unmute your cameras and give us a wave so that people can put a name with a face. Aaron Buchkowski, who is our manager of education at the Positive Psychology Center. There's Aaron with that nice wintry scene behind him on campus. Nicole Stottlemyre, who serves as our coordinator and classroom manager. There's Nicole waving. It's lovely to see you, Nicole. And we also have with us Amy Mulhern, who's from our College of Liberal and Professional Studies. I'm not sure that Amy's going to turn on her camera, but hopefully she will, so that we can get a look at her and away from Amy. Wonderful. So we have a wonderful, robust team here between Laura and Aaron and Nicole. We are well supported at Penn with some of our colleagues within the College of Liberal and Professional Studies, and we are especially excited to spend some time with you today talking about the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. As Laura had mentioned, not only are you well resourced with the team, Laura is an alumna of the program. I am an alumna of the program. So between all of us, we have seen this program from many different angles, both as a student, of course, now as a graduate with a very strong alumni community that continues in positive psychology, and then, of course, as both assistant instructors and then as staff that are working with the program. So we're glad that you're here, and welcome from wherever in the world you're dialing in from. We're delighted that you are investing this time with us today. Okay, so let's get started, and let's just quickly review the agenda. We'll spend just a little bit of time talking about positive psychology. I'm thinking that you know what positive psychology is because you're here, and you may have some curiosities, but so we'll just fill in a few of those gaps, but particularly talk about positive psychology at Penn. Then we'll spend the lion's share of our time talking about the MAPP program, our faculty, our students, our alumni, and we are going to carve out some time to make sure that we get to your questions. So you have a Q&A section. We encourage you to use it, that if you have any questions to go ahead, and also you can keep an eye on that. And if somebody has asked a question that you were thinking about yourself, you can upvote that question to make sure that we're prioritizing it during the Q&A. If you have any personal questions, you can also include them there. Both Aaron and Nicole are going to be monitoring that Q&A, and they'll make sure that they're answering any questions they can there, and that we'll try and get to them after the program is closed and before we close for the day. Okay, so let's get started and let's talk about our positive psychology overview. Now I'm going to show an image of a gentleman who I think most of you probably know. So this is Martin Seligman, who of course is our faculty director of the MAPP program. But Marty, as he's affectionately known here at Penn, is also the founding director of the Positive Psychology Center. And he's one of the founding fathers of positive psychology. So many of you who, if you have read Authentic Happiness or Flourish, may be familiar with the story that Marty was elected as president of the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, back in 1998. And when Marty established his platform, his speech as his first presidential speech for the APA was founded on two platforms. The first was ethnopolitical genocide, but the second was positive psychology, as he called the field and really admired and noted that the field had done so much good work in being able to treat some of the major psychopathologies as a result of a decades-long focus that had been on healing psychopathology. But Marty ask the question, is there more to life than us just healing or getting rid of our depression or getting rid of our anxiety? Is there something that, as he likes to say, is north of zero, and is something where we might think about what creates a really good life that's founded based on strengths? So he and his colleague, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's at Claremont Graduate University, many of you know him as the individual who coined the term flow, talking about what he considers to be the ultimate psychological experience. They co-authored a seminal article in 2000 that was an American Psychologist that proposed the field of positive psychology and really urged researchers around the world to think about not only the individual states, but the traits and the institutions that help to amplify well-being in the world and amplify our experience of what constitutes a flourishing life. So what has happened since that time? Well, since that time, there has been the establishment of the field of positive psychology. And I want to be clear that there were some researchers that really did precede this. Specifically, I'm thinking Ed Diener has a decades-long canon of research in subjective well-being or happiness, right? That precedes this time. But a lot of Ed's work came together along with many other researchers around the world, and it catalyzed a real shift in orientation and funding, where there were hundreds of researchers around the world who began to study well-being and hundreds of studies that began to emerge as a result of that. There were associations that were founded with the International Positive Psychology Association. There were international conferences that were hosted. At this point, we are, I believe, on our 8th World Congress for the International Positive Psychology Association. There have been many professional applications of research that have emerged because the application of positive psychology occurs anywhere where we find human beings. So it's a bit interdisciplinary at its core. We find applications in the areas of education with positive education. Businesses are trying to find out how they can help to make their employees flourish. In the field of coaching, in medicine, in law, in psychotherapy, in many social services and whatnot, people are thinking about this shift in orientation from looking solely at deficits to really thinking about and amplifying strengths and how those might help us to create an even better world. So with that, there was also the founding of the Positive Psychology Center here at the University of Pennsylvania. Now, the Positive Psych Center was founded first and foremost around research, but then there were some additional pillars within the Positive Psychology Center that started to be built over time. So Marty was the founding director of the Positive Psychology Center, and I'm going to speak about each one of these different areas so you have an idea a little bit of what is going on in the field of positive psychology. So Laura, if you wouldn't mind advancing to our next slide. Perfect, beautiful. So I mentioned research as the founding area. And so there are a number of research initiatives that have emerged from the PPC, including, I'm just going to mention a few of them, right? So right now, one of Marty's PhD students who has his PhD and now is continuing to study is focused on primals, or our perspectives on the world that can determine our experience of well-being in the world and how we act, how we are actors in the world. There's the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project that Dr. James Pawelski has been leading, asking the question about how the humanities, such as arts and music, and culture help to shape, are both a reflection of and a shaper of our experience of well-being. David Yaden, Dr. David Yaden, who's also a graduate of the MAPP program, by the way, who studies transcendent experiences, mystical experiences. 40% of the world acknowledges that they've had some sort of a mystical experience, and most of the time it actually really amplifies their well-being in a very long-term fashion. And it's not been very well studied in the past, so David is studying some of that work. Angela Duckworth with the Character Lab, and the World Wellbeing Project, which looks at big data emerging from the posts that people put on social media and validating that against some of our well-validated instruments around personality and around well-being to understand how much of what we put out in the world is actually a reflection of the well-being that we're experiencing ourselves. So that's some of the research that's been going on in positive psychology. But in addition to that, there were some other arms that were built out in the Positive Psychology Center. Importantly, applications. So one of the most well-studied programs at Penn is the Penn Resilience Program, which started off in schools helping kids to be more resilient. That program has now been translated into a variety of different contexts, including the US Army, including professional sports teams, some businesses as well, the Department of Justice, right? So there are a number of different contexts where helping individuals to develop flexible and accurate thinking helps to increase their resilience or their ability to bounce back or navigate in the face of adversity. But the thing that you're here to hear from us is about education. And so there are actually 3 arms of education that we administer out of the Positive Psychology Center. We're going to be speaking about one of those today, but I'd just like to frame the 3 of them so that you understand them. The first is our Foundations of Positive Psychology course, which is available through Coursera. Each of our educational offerings is intended to meet the needs of a very diverse learner audience. And so each of them is targeted in a very different way. The Foundations course through Coursera is targeted towards the lifelong learner who might be interested in learning more about positive psychology. Right in the middle, we have an undergraduate certificate that used to be a 4-course certificate, is now a 6-course certificate that is called our Applied Positive Psychology Certificate. It's part of our Bachelor of Applied Bachelor of Applied Arts and Sciences degree, which is an online degree that's available through Penn. And that certificate was launched in January of 2019. That is all online. But the area that I'm going to be focusing on today, along with my colleagues, is the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. So while APOP is designed to support somebody who wants to be a bit more professionally and personally successful, right, and effective in the work that they do, the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program is intended for individuals who intend to be practitioners in positive psychology, in helping them to become ethical scholar practitioners and to design and develop and launch programs and interventions that help to support well-being in a variety of different and diverse contexts. So we're going to dive in a little bit more and speak some more about MAPP. Okay, so let's dive in and let's go to the next part of our story. Now, this gentleman, I've already showed you a photo of one individual. So Marty is the founder of the field of positive psychology, but Marty needed some help too, right? And so when Penn decided that it would be a good idea to begin to share and translate some of the science of positive psychology with other practitioners in other fields so that we could look at ways to increase flourishing on a worldwide scale, they crafted the Master of Applied Positive Psychology. Now, launching a master's program is no small feat. And so they looked around and they called in this individual, James Pawelski, who had at that time been at Vanderbilt University. So James came to the University of Pennsylvania, was the founding director of the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. He's currently also a professor of practice, serves as the director of education at the Positive Psychology Center, and he also is the lead researcher and principal investigator on the work that they do in the humanities here at the Positive Psychology Center. So his first charge, though, was to really get the MAPP program off the ground. So he came in January of 2005 because they were anticipating bringing in their first class of students in September of 2005. And so they had great support from the university, but the university said, please manage your expectations. Getting a master's degree off the ground is really no small feat, right? Anticipate that in your first year, you're probably going to have somewhere around 10 or 12 students, and that would be a wild success. So they were anticipating 10 to 12 students, and then this happened. This was the first class. As you can see, this is a traditional photo that we take on the stairwell that is in Houston Hall. And every single class almost to date has had their photo taken there. But this class was roughly about 35 students or so. And so the question became, well, is that an outlier? And I'm happy to share that it wasn't. So now MAPP is entering its 17th year. Each year we get somewhere between 180 and 220 applications, and we field roughly a class of anywhere between 35 and 50 students that emerges from that applicant pool. So now we are actually in the process with MAPS, what we call affectionately known as MAP 16. So these will be the graduates of the 2021 year. And right now we are in the process of welcoming applications for what we will be calling MAP 17, or the graduates of the class of 2022 in the Master of Applied Positive Psychology. So our community has grown. And so Laura, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So this is an image of a I guess you'd call it a party. We call academic conferences parties, right? They're exciting times for us to come together with our intellectual community. So this was actually a 10th anniversary celebration of the MAPP program. Each year, however, while this looks like a unique experience, and it was because we had photo documentation, each year we do welcome our alumni back to campus in October for an alumni summit. And I'm happy to say that our alumni numbers now number in the 500s. We've just topped over 500, I think, with our last graduating class. In addition to that, our attendees at our MAPP Summit now top over close to 250 attendees at each one of those summits. So it's a pretty exciting and robust community. But I think the fact that our alumni remain so engaged is to some extent a reflection of the experience that they have in our classroom. So I know you're here to hear about our classroom experience. So I would like to turn things over to Laura Taylor, and she's going to be speaking with you about our MAPP educational design. Laura?
Thank you so much, Leona. I am delighted to spend some time with you. Let's dive in and talk about the educational design of MAPP, because MAPP is intended to provide you with the extensive academic preparation in positive psychology. We look at the theories and empirical foundations of the field and deeply consider ethical application. This extensive preparation is important because it's delivered in one calendar year of full-time study, right? So you've got the fall, spring, and summer semesters. It's a hybrid model, meaning we have both synchronous and asynchronous learning. The synchronous learning is happening in intensive on-site classes, one weekend each month, be it on campus or in our virtual classroom, depending on the state of the current pandemic. Our current class, MAP 16, is operating in a virtual classroom. And we will plan to be back on campus in a traditional classroom setting for those synchronous sessions as it is safe to do so. Then we've also got this asynchronous component, which happens in the distance learning periods between on-site meetings. So you are continuing to learn all year long, and it is a professional master's degree. So we like to emphasize this because it enables scholar practitioners in areas in which they are expert. She mentioned earlier that there are a wide variety of domains in which positive psychology can be applied, and that is absolutely true. We also want to be clear that the educational design of MAPP does not offer separate licensing or credentialing. If you would wish to work with clinical populations through psychology, that's just fine, and you would need to have a licensor to do so. Again, the areas in which you are expert are what's coming into application. So if that's something you are hoping to do, then you would want to continue that education process. Most of our students are working with populations that don't require that level of clinical expertise, and their intention is to apply positive psychology in their professional context, which can be a really fruitful and exciting combination of things that's individual to the person that's coming into the room. And design. We also want to note that this is not necessarily a research master's, right? A small percentage of our students do elect to go on to a PhD, and most of our students are really interested in becoming the scholarly practitioner who are thinking about how to take positive psychology out into the world, and their focus of their capstone project, which is the culminating project of our educational design, is focused on those applications. A little bit more as we continue to think about the educational design and hybrid model of MAPP. One awesome advantage is that it permits students to continue working full-time. So you've got both the full-time work environment and full-time study. It enables students to continue their work, their life, their family commitments. And students who come to MAPP do not typically come to Philadelphia. They typically remain domiciled in their own communities and continue that work and commitments that they have in their communities and organizations. Folks do tend to come to Philadelphia for the on-site learning periods, and students have traveled from as far away as Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia to do so. So we've got a lot of alumni who would be able to speak to you around those experiences. But this is an incredible opportunity because it enriches our educational experience by increasing student diversity. That is such a value of the program and MAPP, and we are delighted to be able to continue to work with all of the applicants and prospective students that come in to create a classroom that really highlights that professional, geographical, personal diversity, which can create a robust learning experience in the classroom. While we have amazing strength in our faculty here in positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, it also enables us to have a participation from leading faculty of a variety of institutions. Our design allows them to come to us on weekends when they're not necessarily committed to their own teaching at a university. And that is huge asset to the program because we're able to really dive into areas of moral psychology, community psychology, physical activity and exercise, and other domains that impact our well-being. I want to take just a minute to highlight some of those wonderful faculty. You've already met Dr. Seligman, which you'll see in the upper left-hand corner. We've got Angela Duckworth, who comes and guests with us, her work on Character Lab and Positive Education. Angela Mackey, Allison Mackey. I'm still stuck on Angela Duckworth. Allison Mackey is a neuroscientist who teaches a course on positive education in the spring and is really looking at how we can develop people across the lifespan to be good learners. And that impacts your application of positive psychology. We've got Dr. James Pawelski, who you've met in the upper right-hand side as our founding director and also the lead on the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project at the Positive Psychology Center. Leona mentioned Dr. Yaden, whose self-transcendent experience work is there on the lower left-hand side. Then you've got in the middle our co-teaching team for positive psychology and individuals. That's Dr. Judy Salzberg-Levick and Dr. Karen Rivich. They're an incredible team together. They've been running the Penn Resilience Program for years and have a lot to offer around application. And of course, Dr. Clifton or Dr. Jared Clifton, who is not only an alum of the program like Dr. Yaden, but working on his primals experience. And the two of them are teaching research methods in MAPP now. So we are so excited and delighted about the strength of our faculty at Penn. And as we mentioned, we've got a lot of people coming to enrich our program. Leona, would you like to comment on any of these particular faculty guests?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, as Laura mentioned, having classes on weekends gives us a lot of freedom, right? And so we can rely both on the strengths of our faculty at Penn as well as on the strengths of faculty who come to us from outside of Penn. Just a few I would love to highlight here. I know you see some familiar faces in here if you're somebody that has been in the field of positive psychology for some time, with Barry Schwartz there in the upper left. You can see Ed Diener. I had mentioned him in subjective well-being previously. But in addition to that, we're also able to look at and explore positive psychology from a variety of different areas. And when I say positive psychology, I'll talk about flourishing and thinking about flourishing and the context in which we find ourselves. So a couple of folks that I would highlight, we were happy to welcome just about 10 days ago, Dr. Martin Davidson, who's with the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia, who speaks about not just organizations managing diversity, but actually leveraging the difference between people as a real asset and something that we can amplify and grow from within organizations. You'll notice Barbara Fredrickson is there speaking about positive emotion from the University of North Carolina. Dr. Philip Atiba Goff, who's the founder of the Center for Policing Equity. He has he's got a co-appointment right now, I think, with between Yale University and New York University. Jane Gillum, who's here at Swarthmore, is one of the co-founders of the Penn Resilience Program. So there are a variety of different folks who come to us, and we're very fortunate to have a broad network of researchers and community. It's truly an intellectual community within the MAPP program that collectively comes together with the shared mission of amplifying flourishing in the world but doing so in a way that is both ethical and research informed. And that's what's really exciting. So, all of the folks here we consider to be good friends of the program, from Jane Dutton at the University of Michigan to Paul Bloom from Yale University. We're delighted to be able to welcome them in, but also they are, when they come into our classroom, truly conduct themselves like peers with other folks in the classroom. And we really do have some rich and robust intellectual discussions. Okay, I could go on for a very long time, Laura, but I'm going to turn things back to you because you've got some important things to cover.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Leona. So let's take a little bit of a dive at the curricular, which you can also find on our website if you'd like to go through. But in the fall semester of 2020, we offered 4 courses. We had the Introduction to Positive Psychology with Dr. Seligman, Research Methods and Evaluations by Dr. Clifton and Dr. Yaden, Foundations of Positive Interventions by Dr. Powelski, and Perspectives on Well-Being with our coordinating instructor, Leona Brandwene. And we welcomed Michael Boehm, Paul Bloom, Philippa Tibogoff, Jonathan Haidt, Isaac Perlutensky, John Rady, Barry Schwartz. So a lot of these are faces and names that you've heard us introduce during the early part of this particular webinar. And this is to give you a flavor of what weird topics we're covering in that fall semester. If we move into the spring semester, we're looking at applying positive interventions in institutions. That's where David Cooperrider, Martin Davidson, Jane Dutton, Chris Feutner, and Amy Wisniewski tend to come into play. We've got positive psychology in individuals with Judy and Karen, who we've mentioned earlier, and positive education with Allison Mackey. We've got guests in that class as well: Angela Duckworth, Alejandro Adler, Jane Gillum, and then of course the humanities and human flourishing, led by our own director, James Pawelski. As you can see, the way the courses are designed is to help you really have that grounded education in the theory, the research, and the practice, the application of positive psychology. It's wide-ranging, and honestly, as someone who's been through the program, it's really fascinating to learn all of the nuance and attunement that goes into the ethical application of positive psychology. So that is something that we really work to ensure that you are ready for the summer semester, because that is the moment when you will approach your capstone project, an independent project that integrates what you as the student has both learned in the program and how you want to advance the application of positive psychology moving forward. In other words, how does it intersect with that vision that you may put in your application and your hope for application of positive psychology as you move forward into the alumni community that is wonderful and robust. What does that look like? We've mentioned we have on-site classes and that in between we have those distance learning periods, correct? So we have, our dates are already available on our website and you can look at, and I would encourage you to hold these calendar dates if you're planning to apply, because you too could be a classroom and fully committed. So go in and put that in and start planning accordingly. That's why they're released well in advance. And notice that while you're having those intensive on-site periods of learning, you also will have the distance learning periods between. So it is full-time study commitment. The spring of 2022 looks quite similar, 5 on-sites with distance learning periods. And then, of course, we've got the summer, which while you won't be coming to on-site classes during the summer semester for your capstone project, you will be fully engaged in full-time study on your project with your advisor that's paired to help guide you through that process. So that is a little bit about the program format and how you would go through it. You can expect about 25 hours a week in MAPP for that learning commitment. That's based on data, 25 to 30 hours based on data from our alumni that have gone through the program. And that will vary based on your reading and writing speed. So that's a common question we get asked when they're looking at schedule. And I just wanted to go on and address that now. And Leona, why don't we spend a little bit more time talking about the wonderful students that come into the MAPP program?
Betcha, you betcha. Thanks, Laura. Okay, so people often ask, what kind of students are you looking for and what's it like to be in the classroom? So let me answer a little bit about that second question first. And I'm starting off here with some images of some of the engagement that you see in our classroom. So you'll see quite a few folks who are smiling. We do like to have fun in the MAPP classroom. We do rely a lot on humor. We do have lots of celebrations, and we do like to ensure that we are connected to one another as real human beings, not just as in terms of our intellectual inquiry. And of course, it's an intellectual environment. So you'll see that there's a lot of deep engagement here. There's plenty of confusion, right, that goes along. Angela Duckworth often likes to say that the most common emotion that's experienced in an academic environment is confusion. And that's a good thing, because that is an indicator that you're struggling to understand something and making a breakthrough and growing yourself from an intellectual standpoint. But in addition to that, you'll see a lot of engagement. You'll really see people who are big thinkers, who like to push the envelope, right, in terms of thinking, but also really ask very hard questions about how we apply some of the research that and some of the theoretical foundations of well-being and apply them in different settings. So let's think about how that looks, right? So when you think about what does a typical MAPP student look like, right? Let's talk about some of the demographics of some of our students. So Laura, why don't we advance on to the next slide? So we've collected a little bit of data here that has, and you can see that the range of ages in our classroom is quite broad, right? So the median age falls somewhere around the mid-30s, but when we look at the range of ages that have come in, the youngest student that we had ever had come to MAPP was right out of undergraduate and was 21. And the oldest student that we've ever had matriculate in the program was 70 years old when they came to MAPP, and by the way, is still practicing and still teaching in the work that he does. But broadly, right, often we see the mid-career professional. So somebody who is fairly well established in their field and is looking to then marry that knowledge that they have about their own field with the knowledge around human flourishing, and then fuse the two together in some sort of a professional application. That's not to say that we don't have undergrads come to us too, and often we will see some of those people think about the MAPP program as pre-professional training. We've had a number of folks that have come to us as a gap year, either before or in the middle of their medical education as they were becoming doctors. We've had other folks that have taken MAPP before they go to law school, and some that have come here after they've gone to law school. So it's a variety of different areas, but I'll talk about those professions in just a moment. In terms of our nationalities, we are intentionally welcoming a variety of diverse geographies to the classroom, because often diverse geographies bring diverse perspectives to our classroom, and that's really enriching in our conversations. So there are 33 countries that are listed here. Laura, I realized last night as I was going through some of these slides, after our conversation with Joe yesterday, we're missing South Africa. So technically
right.
there's 34 countries that are on here, but it gives you an idea of the global span, right, of the experience in the program, but then also the global span of the alumni network. I'll be frank, a couple of years ago when John Haidt was going to do some research in Europe, he called me and he said, Leona, who are all the MAPsters, who are, all the MAPP alumni that are in Europe, because I want to make sure that I connect with them when I go to Europe. And so we were going through, the list of folks that he was going to connect with. So it really is quite a robust learning community, and it does extend around the globe. And we're very proud of that fact. Now, I had mentioned to you that I was going to talk to you a little bit about some of the professional diversity. So before we get to that, I actually just have one more image that I want to show you. This was something that one of my classmates put together, and this was at one of the early summits, but this was in my class. You can see some of the tags around Australia and New Zealand that were there, because I think we had 2 folks from New Zealand and 2 folks from Australia who are in my class. But when you look at this, right, and you think about what it means to engage in the MAPP classroom, it's beyond just what am I getting for a degree, right? There's a degree of commitment that people bring in terms of their own social mission in the world and how they are amplifying flourishing amongst the communities that they touch or have influence over locally to them. So you can see where some of the tags are coming in, but I will also tell you, so when I came to MAPP, I was living about 5 hours away from Philadelphia. And let me tell you, when I realized that some of my classmates were flying 22 hours one way, it really put the value of my education front and center for me, and I really made sure that I paid attention in class. All right, so let's go on. Let's actually talk about some of the demographics from a professional standpoint, because this is one of the strengths of the MAPP classroom. So MAPP is intentionally professionally diverse, right? And so you will find individuals who are in the field of medicine who are having conversations with individuals in the field of law or in business, because there's a lot that we can learn and cross-pollinate between different professions and different disciplines that help to enrich the conversation when we think about what does it mean to increase flourishing, right? So when we think about well-being, I often say, who doesn't want to be well, right? So where does positive psychology belong? Well, anywhere you find a human being, right? So that means, where do you find human beings? In a lot of different areas, right? People interface with many different professions on a regular basis. So some of the professions that you'll see in our classroom are people in the area of health. But even when we talk about health, that's a big messy bucket, right? There's a lot that goes into health. There are physicians, there are nurses, there are physician assistants, there are people who are orthodontists and dentists and whatnot. So it's quite a diverse group professionally that even falls within a broader bucket that we often constitute, as being health. In addition, we tend to see people from the field of education. I'm particularly proud to say that the International Positive Education Network, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, was actually the founding executive director was a MAPPster. But in the field of education, not only frontline teachers, but also administrators who are thinking about how to create a culture and context of flourishing within their community. In our classroom right now, we have an individual whose title is the Director of Culture and Empowerment, and it's at an all-boys school that's down in the DC area. So it gives you an idea of some of the diverse range of professions and professional perspectives that come to the table in some of these areas. Some of the other professions that we actually see too include in the field of business. So again, think about business, right? We think about that as like being one discipline, but the diversity of experience that's within the field of business is quite broad, from people who are in the C-suite, right, with CEOs that come in thinking about how to create flourishing amongst their employees, to individuals who are working one-on-one, such as coaches, right, that are working one-on-one with individuals and helping to amplify their well-being, to people who are recruiters or directors of human resources. So again, when we think about business, we think of it as, we tend to, kind of distill it down to be one thing, but it's quite broad. Even thinking about the field of law, we've got folks that are in legal education, folks that are in private practice, folks that are in public practice that are in the offices of the Attorney General at various states within the United States. So it is quite broad and diverse when we think about it. We also have individuals that come to us from social services, right? And so thinking about some of the other broad arrays. So religious leaders, I think we've had 2 rabbis that have come to MAPP, as well as other spiritual leaders that have been a part of our community. Engineers, right? Individuals who have served in the military or are active duty in the military right now. People who are working in journalism. In particular, Catherine Guildenstad, who is from Denmark and was a journalist, a very high-ranking journalist, actually started a field of study that is called constructive journalism as a result of her capstone and the work that she did with MAPP, as well as state and local elected government officials. So I'm curious, right? So we used the chat earlier and we got an idea of where everybody is from. I would imagine that we've got quite a bit of diversity in terms of professional application. So I'm going to ask you, you don't have to put a long thing in the chat, but I would just ask you to give us an idea of what field you're coming from. And then also if there's a particular area of application that you're interested in. So you might be somebody who's in business and thinking about resilience applications, right? Or strengths applications. So share with us a little bit in the chat. We'd love to get to know you a little bit better. I see some people who are already posting in here with social services. I'm interested in grief research. I'm excited to see that. We actually have 2 organizations that have been a part of our service learning projects in the past 3 years that work with individuals that that have experienced grief and are looking at how they adjust and respond to grief. And because grief is a part of the human experience and definitely congruent with well-being, especially in the way that we manage it. So I see a variety of different possibilities here from coaches. I see individuals who are interested in nursing and wellness. We've got a mindfulness instructor for elementary and middle school students, exciting, people who are in finance. And so I see, a variety of different things. So some of the diversity that you see in that chat is to some extent some of the diversity that you'll see curated in our classroom. As we assemble classes together, we really are interested in amplifying the quality of the discussions, and we can do that through some of the diverse perspectives that come to our classroom. So I think I had already mentioned recent college grads. So Laura, why don't we advance on to the next slide, and we can just go through and talk a little bit about the MAPP experience. We do occasionally have some celebrations. Of the lower right-hand corner is an end of year celebration as the class was wrapping up some incredible work that they had done with a number of organizations outside of the Penn community in applying positive psychology. Let's take a look at the next slide. So this is a picture, an image of a cohort. So in addition to, a large classroom that affords you the opportunity to interact with a number of different individuals as well as faculty members, it's also important to have small knit learning groups. And so cohorts are one of the ways that we do that. And so individuals work with a small team of learners, both in the fall and the spring semesters. And those help them, together. They either work on group projects together, but sometimes they just come together as small learning communities to talk about different ideas that emerge from our classroom and how exciting those ideas are. So let's go to the next slide. Great. So these are just some more pictures. In the upper right, you can actually see one of our students presenting because in the final onsite of the spring semester. In my class, we actually turn the classroom over to you, and our classes, our students present the projects that they've been working on all semester, and we get our minds blown at some of the incredible work that's done out in the communities. I would just highlight two individuals in the upper left who are doing extraordinary work. Tejendra Luthra, who's working in India and has founded an institute for research and policing, and is a former chief of police in his state. Rolanda Manitowabi, who works in an addictions research center up in Wikwemikong in Canada with First Nations people. So we just have some really extraordinary people that are doing some really diverse applications, and our conversations are quite robust. So, but the conversations don't stop when you're a student, right? So they go on. I had mentioned that we have that summit that we have every year, and that we've got this strong alumni community. So I would mention to you, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what you can do with a MAPP degree. And I will also say our community is quite robust. And we hear that from our colleagues within Penn all the time, who say the degree of engagement that we have from our alumni is truly mind-blowing. And it is a close-knit community, our MAPP alumni community, which, as I mentioned, is over 500 members strong at this point. So let's chat a little bit about what are some of the experiences that we've seen that come out with a MAPP degree. So we have some numbers to share with you. And I would say that these numbers are probably aged a little bit, simply because it's really hard to stay on top of the burgeoning, work that's going on in positive psychology, and especially amongst MAPP alumni. So I'll highlight the MAPP Alumni Association website, which is at the base of that slide, mappalum.org, because you can float around there and learn a little bit about what some of our alumni are doing. But many of them have authored books, right? A variety of them have authored even multiple books, right? And more than one book. In addition, I'd say that I probably get about an email every single month from somebody who has had an article that's been published in a scholarly journal as a result of perhaps some things that have emerged from their capstone and some research that they did with their capstone, or other opportunities that have grown from there. We have a variety of people that have gone on to explore their PhDs from the MAPP program and have become quite proliferate publishers of additional research. I had mentioned Jer Clifton and David Yaden before. Johannes Eichstadt is another individual. Anne Johnstone has gone on and gotten her PhD. Lucy Hone in Australia. So there are a variety of people, or excuse me, in New Zealand. Lucy's in New Zealand. A variety of people that have gone on and continue to contribute back to the field by continuing to discover new and important research that emerges. So a variety of journal articles emerge from there. Our alumni are also leaders in the field of positive psychology. So I had mentioned that one of our alumni was actually the founding executive director of the International Positive Education Network, known as IPEN, to many of you who are teachers out there. And we would encourage you to go ahead and take a look at the work that IPEN does. But in addition to that, some of our MAPsters, as we affectionately like to call them, founded the Canadian Positive Psychology Association, the Chinese Positive Psychology Association. One of our alumni founded founded the Colombian Positive Psychology Association, and we're involved in the growth of the Japanese Positive Psychology Association. So there are a variety of our alumni that are contributing in robust ways. Laura Taylor, who's here on the call, has been a part of the International Positive Psychology Association. Jenny Brennan and others have been leaders in that area. Our own James Pawelski was the founding executive director of the International Positive Psychology Association. And we now have 35 alums that are now teaching at the university level. So there really is a wide variety. Our students also, at Penn, we want to make sure, we once had a dean who used to say that knowledge that's left in the mind is like gold that's left in the mine. And so we want to make sure that knowledge gets translated into real world application and that we're sharing that more broadly. Our MAPP capstones are published on Scholarly Commons and are available for people to download. So it gives you an idea of just the vibrancy of our classroom. And I think that that's the word that I would really use to encapsulate all of the experiences. When you think about all the diverse experiences we have in the classroom, is that it's a very vibrant classroom. So perhaps you would like to be a part of that vibrant classroom. And if you would, then you're going to need to learn about admissions. And so I'm going to turn things over to Laura Taylor to talk a little bit more about admissions.
Thank you so much, Leona. So all of the information around our admissions process is available on our website, and I encourage you to take a peek at that because we're going to be going quite quickly in this moment so that we can turn our attention to your questions in just a few moments. But the application deadline is March 1st, which is approaching. So I think it would be a good time if you feel like you are a fit for this program to start considering what materials you may need. You'll need your resume or your curricular vitae. You're going to need an essay. There are 4 questions in the essay that you can find on our website. You can answer them individually, one at a time. You can do an integrated essay. It doesn't matter to us. What matters is that you're telling your best story and sharing that vision for your application of positive psychology within your field of expertise. You're going to need 3 letters of recommendation. We're looking at you both as a potential student and as someone who is potentially applying positive psychology after you graduate, right? So ensure those letters of recommendation are professional letters. While your mom may really love you and think you're amazing for the MAPP program, we may not need her opinion in this moment. So ensure that you're thinking about and curating those letters appropriately. All of your transcripts, and I mean all of your transcripts. So undergraduate and graduate, if you took a few courses, say at a community college over a summer to ensure that you were ready to go in your undergraduate, those 2. So just be sure you're not forgetting about any university education that you've had in your past life. We want to see all of that. And transcripts from schools outside the United States do need to be evaluated by either Educational Perspectives through Certifile, which is within the application portal, or by World Education Services. So you get to choose your evaluator, but you want to be sure that you're using a course-by-course evaluation so that we can ensure that we're comparing you effectively against the other applicants who are coming in with US-based transcripts, and that it's translated into a language that our admissions committee can read. So that's very helpful for us. Be sure that you're going through that process. It can take a bit of time. So if you are an international applicant, and that does apply to you, please be sure that you're going on and starting that process. The other thing I'll highlight is if you spend, say, a semester abroad from a U.S. institution, we don't need an evaluation as long as it's 1 semester or less. If you spent more than 1 semester abroad, we will want an evaluation of those international transcripts. Otherwise, we look to your conferring institution transcript for those grades. The GRE. The GRE is something that we require if your bachelor's degree was earned later than spring of 2018 or less than 3 years ago. It's encouraged by our applicants who need to have a little bit more information so that our admissions committee can ensure that they're getting a nice, robust review. And if English is not your native language, we will require a TOEFL or IELTS score. So just know that that's something else you want to be keeping in mind. It is quite important for our program. There's a lot of information that comes at you quite quickly during the course of 1 year in terms of reading and writing in English, and we want to ensure that you are successful. So that's the aim there. All admissions decisions are released by the end of June. And so we reach out during that process if there's anything else we need from you, but generally speaking, once you've turned it in, you will hear from us later on. Scholarships and financial aid are a common question. So we do have a scholarship called the Christopher Peterson Memorial Fellowship. It is awarded to a student each year. Those applications are due March 15th. Alongside a completed MAPP application. So it's a supplementary application. You want to be sure you have both completed if you are applying for that. You can find details on our website. We have the Beishan Tang Scholarship, which is specific to people who are in Hong Kong and looking to apply positive psychology there. We have had international students effectively use Fulbright or Rotary scholarships. We have veterans who have been able to use things like Yellow Ribbon or GI Bill to help offset their education costs. And of course, there are a lot of other places you can look, from your own employer benefits, perhaps, to nonprofits, associations that you may be a part of. Ensure that if you are looking for scholarship and aid, that you are creating a search for yourself. I was able to find some scholarship myself through my background in musical theater and arts education, finding both my union and then going through a nonprofit for that. So they're out there. Do search. It can be helpful. Also, if you're interested in financial aid as a part of funding your educational experience in MAPP, you'll want to complete the FAFSA if you live in the United States. That helps you ensure that you can get some of the government loans. And you can do that after you complete your application. You don't have to wait for a letter of decision in order to go in and get that process rolling. If you are admitted, the Student Financial Services will ask you to do a registration form and then continue to discuss with you about other options such as Grad Plus loans, so that you can ensure that you are managing the financial commitment of your education. Funds will be available for both the fall and spring semester around that. And with that, briefest of overviews on the application process, let's turn our attention to you guys and what your burgeoning questions may be in the chat. And I am going to share one more slide just in case you need it. If you need more information, you can find us online. You can look for our deadline, March 1st, and here's a number you can call or an email you can use. All right, now I'm going to stop my screen share so we can focus on the questions at hand.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thanks, Laura. Well, I'm actually looking at the Q&A right now, and it looks to me as though Nicole and Aaron have been crushing it. I see 49 answered questions already, which is wonderful. And we still have a handful of questions that are still open. I do see some questions that are around the program logistics with relation to COVID and to whether or not MAPP is online. So I think we'll dive into that one first. So first and foremost, I just want to say, we see you, right? I think in a global pandemic, I don't think there's anybody that hasn't been touched by COVID. So please do know we understand that everybody is navigating a lot of new territory as we navigate during the pandemic. So for MAPP 16, so one of the things that I'll say, Laura had mentioned earlier that we are committed to the ratio of asynchronous and synchronous learning that we have in MAPP. And so that synchronous learning happens in one of two ways. It either happens on our live campus when everybody collects and travels to Philadelphia, or it happens on what we like to refer to as our virtual campus when everybody collects and gathers together on Zoom. So we have remained committed, right, to sustaining that. And that by and large has been an enormous and wonderful aspect of the MAPP program that has sustained itself through this year, even as we've had a number of individuals who have, every individual, but a number of individuals who are in our classroom this year who would not have been able to attend MAPP otherwise, simply because of travel restrictions and other things that are occurring because of the pandemic. So as we're looking ahead to the 21-22 year, I am fully appreciative that all of you will have questions. We share some of those questions too, right? And we're at a bit of an inflection point right now with the pandemic, right? With now that the vaccine is starting to be distributed and other things are going on. So we are continuing to remain flexible with regard to our approach with regard to this. Some of the things that we're flexing is whether or not our gatherings will be on campus, on our physical campus, or on our virtual campus, or some combination thereof. The one thing that we are committed to, though, is that the MAPP experience remains the same. Laura and I just had a conversation with a student yesterday, and he said, it's amazing to me. He said, we've got a classroom of 43 people and we are as close as we would as if we saw each other all the time. And in addition to that, none of us feels like we've compromised. Like all of us feel as though we have it had exactly as robust and as high quality an experience as if we had come to campus. So that was number one, exciting for us to hear. But number two, I hope provides a reassurance to you too. So we will do our best and we will stay in close communication with all of our applicants and be sharing with you information as soon as we have information available with regard to when the university is going to be opening its campus, who it will be opening to, whether that or not that's going to be a phased opening, etc. But again, please do anticipate those dates that are on our website, which have the synchronous learning sessions. Those synchronous learning sessions happen no matter what, right? So those are dates that we are committed to, whether those will be on our physical campus in Philadelphia or on our virtual campus via Zoom. But I can say that based on this year's experience, MAPP 16 has been extraordinary, and I feel as close to our MAPP 16 students, and in some ways even closer, because we've really come together during this extraordinary time. But everybody also sees our individual roles, right, in making sure that we're committed to flourishing on a global level, and how the need for that is as high as it's ever been, particularly in light of a global pandemic. Okay, so I think that probably handled most of that. One of the things I will also say is that we are also committed that people in the classroom have the same experience together. So we will not run a side-by-side where half of our students are online and half of them are coming onto campus, right? We want to make sure our cohorts, when I say our cohorts, our class, when they come together, it's really quite a bonding experience to be together at MAPP, and we want to make sure that there's no disparity or difference in how people are experiencing their MAPP experience. So if we are going to be on campus, we'll make sure that everybody in the classroom can be on campus. If we are going to be online, we'll make sure that everybody in the classroom can be online. Okay.
Fantastic. I see there's a question here about explaining more about how students are paired with advisors, presumably for that capstone project. And we've got a follow up around when and how does that capstone get declared. So we have an incredible Judy Salzberg-Levitt, matchmaker extraordinaire of capstone projects for all MAPP students. And basically, as the year progresses, she'll be dropping little bits of information, preparing you along the way so that you can find and discover exactly what it is you're going to be doing and find the support and the advisor that's right for you, because it's going to be different for every student. She's got a list of advisors that have done in the past, and sometimes she'll be open to new advisors depending on the topic that you're interested in diving deeply into. But she is that matchmaker. Everything goes through Judy, and that way our students and our advisors are well cared for in that process. And so an advisor doesn't get necessarily bombarded by half the class if there's a belle of the ball, as she likes to call it. So that is a process that you are walked through. The typical time in which you're choosing that advisor is right about now, actually. The current class during the Onsite 5 of the fall has started that process, and that will continue for the next through the next onsite, and everyone should be paired up by Onsite 2 of spring, so that they're able to really set the foundations for successful work during the summer.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. So I see a couple of questions that are around admission. So there was a question around letters of recommendation. And so somebody had asked, who can provide that besides teaching faculties? So certainly letters of recommendation can come from some of the prior academic experiences that you've had, but particularly because we are an applied program and practitionership is a real strength of the program. If you have professional experience and people that can support you on the profession and reflect on their experience with you as a person in professional context, we would absolutely encourage you to have some letters of recommendation that are professional in nature. In addition to that, there have been a couple of questions about the GRE. So the GRE is the graduate record exam. That is a test that is a graduate school entrance exam. The GRE is only required if you have fewer than 3 years of professional experience before you apply to MAPP. If you have 3 or more years of professional experience, that is considered as a substitute or in lieu of that graduate record exam. If you do need to take the graduate record exam, somebody had asked whether or not that it's weighted. So I will say that it depends on the applicant, right? So there's a difference between an applicant who is fresh out of undergraduate, right, and has the GRE, right, versus an applicant who is 30 years out of undergraduate, but has this robust portfolio of professional experience. And so between the two, we're looking for somebody that has demonstrated their professional strengths and their professional accomplishments. And for the other, we're looking for the potential, right? So the professional promise, somebody who is likely to have strengths or strong application once they accrue some of that professional experience and are able to apply their MAPP degree. So in terms of, we don't have a hard weighting scale, right? There's not an algorithm that I can share with you and say, well, it's weighted to about 25% of you, because it's not, right? And we do look at each applicant very carefully, but very much so we are looking at your academic preparation, your professional preparation, and then your vision for the future and how you intend to apply positive psychology in your professional and personal domains in helping us to create a better world.